They told me my land was the perfect place for a shortcut, like it was some kind of compliment. Like I should feel lucky people wanted to drive across it. And I guess that's when I realized something. People will take what's yours, smile while doing it, and still expect you to thank them for it. It started on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind that doesn't ask much from you. I was standing in my kitchen, mug of coffee in hand, looking out over the front stretch of my property. 5 acres, give or take, just outside a small town called Mill Ridge. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Bought it 10 years ago after I got tired of city noise and neighbors who thought shared wall meant shared life. Out here, it was just me, the wind, and a long patch of open grass that rolled gently down toward the county road. I like that view. Still do, in a way. There's something honest about land that hasn't been told what to be yet. Anyway, I remember noticing the first car because it slowed down in a strange way. Not like someone checking directions, more like someone making a decision they weren't supposed to make. It rolled past my driveway, hesitated, then just turned off the road and onto my grass. I actually blinked. Thought maybe I missed something. The car didn't stop, didn't even bounce much, just drove straight across the field like it had done it 100 times before, cutting toward the narrow service lane behind my property. Gone in maybe 15 seconds. I stood there for a second, coffee halfway to my mouth, thinking, okay, that's weird. But not enough to get worked up about. People make dumb choices sometimes. Then another car came. This one didn't hesitate at all, just turned and followed the same line, almost like it was tracing something invisible. That's when I set the mug down. By the third car, a white delivery van that came in a little too fast and left a deeper set of tire marks. I knew this wasn't random anymore. Someone had figured something out, and they weren't keeping it to themselves. I stepped outside, still in my house shoes, and walked down toward the road. The grass was already bending where the tires had cut through, not destroyed yet, but pressured, like it was being asked to give way. I followed the tracks with my eyes first, then my feet, tracing that makeshift path all the way across my land. It curved slightly around a patch of uneven ground. Smart. Whoever started it knew how to drive. And then it slipped out the back, connecting neatly to that service lane that led back into town. And just like that, I understood. Somewhere up the road, something had changed. So I grabbed my keys, got in my truck, and drove about half a mile north. Didn't take long to find it. Cones, flashing signs, a couple of county trucks, and a big orange board that read road work ahead. Expect delays. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching traffic back up in both directions. People tapping their steering wheels, checking their phones, looking for a way out. And apparently, someone had found one. I actually let out a short laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. You put a delay in front of people, and suddenly rules start feeling optional. On the way back, I passed a couple of cars heading toward my place. Not speeding, not reckless, just intentional. Like they already knew where they were going. That's when it stopped being interesting and started being mine to deal with. By noon, the grass had flattened into a visible trail. Not a road. Not yet. But something you couldn't ignore anymore. A couple of deeper ruts were starting to show where heavier vehicles had passed through. Around 1 o'clock, my neighbor Hank pulled up in his old blue pickup, leaned out the window and said, "You charging tolls now, Caleb, or just running a charity road?" I shook my head. "You seen this before today?" "Just this morning," he said, glancing out at the field. Word spreads fast when it saves 2 minutes. 2 minutes, I repeated, more to myself than to him. He nodded like that was all the explanation anyone needed. Then he drove off, probably to avoid the same delay everyone else was trying to dodge. I stayed out there a little longer, watching as another car approached, slowed, then made that same quiet, confident turn onto my land. No asking, no signaling, no hesitation, just taking. I didn't wave them down, didn't yell, didn't even step closer. I just stood there, arms crossed, committing it to memory. Because here's the thing. Once people start doing something like that, they don't stop on their own. Not when it works. Not when it's easy. Not when no one tells them otherwise. And right then, I hadn't. By late afternoon, it was worse. A steady stream now. Not constant, but frequent enough that the grass didn't have time to recover between tires. You could see the dirt underneath starting to show through. Dark lines cutting across something that used to be soft and even. One driver took the turn too wide and clipped a young maple I planted last spring. Snapped one of the lower branches clean off. He paused for a second, just a second, then kept going. I felt something shift in my chest when that happened. Not anger, not right away, more like a line being drawn. I walked over to the tree after he left, picked up the broken branch, and just held it there for a moment. It wasn't about the tree, not really. It was about what it meant. They weren't just passing through anymore. They were leaving marks. That evening, I went back inside, sat at my desk, and started pulling out paperwork. Survey maps, boundary lines, county records, everything I had from when I bought the land. Because I needed to be sure. Not just emotionally, legally. And as I spread those papers out across the table, tracing lines with my finger under the dim kitchen light, one thing became very clear. That shortcut everyone had decided to use didn't exist. I sat there longer than I expected, just staring at those lines on paper like they might suddenly rearrange themselves and tell me I was wrong. That maybe I'd missed something, some old agreement, some forgotten easement buried in fine print. But they didn't move, didn't change, didn't offer me any kind of convenient excuse. The boundary was clean. The road ended exactly where it always had. And everything past that point, every inch those tires had crossed, belonged to me. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who goes looking for fights. I've lived out here long enough to understand that peace is something you protect quietly. You mind your business, you give people space, and most of the time they return the favor. But this wasn't someone borrowing a tool or letting their dog wander a little too far. This was different. This was dozens of people, maybe more, deciding my land was a solution to their inconvenience. And the worst part was how easy it had become for them. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Didn't even set an alarm, just opened my eyes with that same thought already sitting there waiting for me. I made coffee, walked out to the porch, and sure enough, first car came through before the sun had fully burned off the fog. No hesitation. Second one followed maybe 30 seconds later. By the time I finished my mug, I'd counted 9. 9 people who had no idea who I was, what that land meant to me, or why it mattered, and none of them cared enough to find out. Around mid-morning, I decided to make a call. County office picked up after a few rings, and I got a woman named Denise. She had that calm, practiced tone, like she'd handled just about every kind of complaint there was and had learned not to take any of it personally. I explained the situation, kept it simple. There's traffic cutting across my property because of the roadwork on Route 6. I just want to know, did the county approve that? There was a pause. I could hear her typing. No, sir, she said finally. Detour routes do not include private property unless there's a formal agreement in place. Is there one? I asked. Not that I can see. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly. So, just to be clear, nobody has permission to be driving across my land. That would be correct. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there for a second, letting that settle. Because now it wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was fact. Out on the field, another car rolled through, same path, same confidence. I watched it from the window, arms folded, and for the first time since this started, I didn't feel confused. I felt decided. Now here's where most people would probably throw up a fence. Maybe a gate, something obvious, something that says stop in a language nobody can misunderstand. And I thought about it, I really did. But fences, they send a message. A loud one. They escalate things. And more importantly, they make it about control. This wasn't about control. This was about boundaries. So instead of blocking the path, I changed it. That afternoon, I called a contractor I'd worked with before, guy named Luis. Good man, practical, didn't ask too many questions unless he needed to. He pulled up around noon, stepped out of his truck, took one look at the field and said, "Well, that's new." "Yeah," I said. "And temporary." He nodded like he understood more than I'd actually said. I showed him the path, explained what I needed, not a barrier, not a wall, just something that made crossing inconvenient enough that people would think twice. We settled on shallow drainage trenches. Legal, useful, clearly visible. Not dangerous, not hidden, just enough to interrupt the flow. Luis crouched down, ran his hand through the dirt where the tires had worn it down. "Won't take much," he said. "They're already committed to the line. You break it in the right spots, they'll hesitate." "That's the idea," I replied. Work started within the hour. Small excavator, clean cuts, nothing aggressive. Just a few narrow trenches crossing the path at slight angles, spaced out so no one could glide through without adjusting. We even marked them properly, just in case, Bright flags, visible edges. No tricks, no surprises. By late afternoon, it was done. I stood there with Luis as he packed up his equipment, both of us looking at the field like we were waiting for something to happen. "Think it'll work?" he asked. I shrugged. People don't like inconvenience. We'll see how much they like this. He gave a small smile, tipped his hat, and drove off. Didn't take long. First car came through just before 5. Slowed down like the others had, started the turn, then stopped. You could almost see the moment it registered. The driver leaned forward, squinting at the trenches, trying to figure out if it was worth it. It wasn't. He backed up slowly, awkwardly, then pulled back onto the road and drove off. Second car, different story. This one tried. Came in a little faster, maybe thinking momentum would carry him through. Hit the first trench and immediately stopped short. Not a crash, nothing dramatic. Just that sharp, sudden realization that the path wasn't as simple as it looked anymore. He reversed quicker than the first guy. By sunset, it was quiet again. No more cars. No more engines cutting across the grass. Just wind moving through the field like it used to. I won't lie. There was a moment, standing there in that silence, where I felt something close to satisfaction. Not victory, not exactly, just balance being restored. But it didn't last. Next morning, my phone rang. Didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "This is Mark Ellison with the County Transportation Office," the voice said. Professional, a little tight. "We've received some reports that traffic flow in the area has been disrupted." I leaned against the kitchen counter, looking out at the field. "Disrupted how?" "Well," he continued, "it seems the informal access route drivers had been using is no longer available." "Informal," I repeated. "That's one word for it." There was a brief pause. "We understand that the land belongs to you," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But the current situation is causing significant congestion on Route 6. I took a sip of coffee, let that sit for a second. My land was being used without permission. "Yes, and we're not disputing ownership," he replied. "But sometimes in situations like this, temporary solutions don't override property rights." I cut in, calm but firm. Silence. Not long, but enough. Then he cleared his throat. "Would you be willing to remove the trenches temporarily, just until the roadwork is completed?" I looked back out at the field, at those clean lines cutting across the path where tires used to run. "Would you be willing," I said slowly, "to formally request access to my property?" Another pause. Longer this time. "No," he admitted. "Then I think we're done here." I hung up before he could respond. Now, maybe that sounds harsh. Maybe it sounds like I was digging my heels in just to prove a point. But here's the thing. If I'd said yes in that moment, if I'd just smoothed everything back over and let it continue, then what exactly was mine anymore? Because once something becomes convenient for enough people, it stops feeling temporary. And I wasn't about to let my land become someone else's habit. Around noon, a county truck pulled up near the edge of my property. Out stepped a man in a reflective vest, clipboard in hand. Looked like the kind of guy who measured things for a living. He walked the boundary slowly, careful, deliberate. Checked the trenches, took a few notes, glanced at the markers I'd set out. I met him halfway across the field. "Caleb Wright?" he asked. "That's me. Name's Daniel Cho. County engineer." We shook hands. His grip was firm, not aggressive. "Mind if I take a closer look?" he said. "Go ahead." He spent a good 15 minutes walking the length of the path, occasionally crouching, measuring depth, checking spacing. Didn't say much while he worked, which I appreciated. Finally, he stood up, brushed the dirt off his hands, and looked at me. "You kept everything within code," he said. "Drainage's legitimate. Markings are clear. There's no safety violation here." I nodded. That was the plan. He gave a small, almost reluctant smile. "Then, you're within your rights." And I'll tell you something. That sentence, it carried weight. More than any argument, more than any opinion. Because now it wasn't just me saying it. It was official. Traffic stayed on the road after that. Backups got worse, sure. People honked more, got impatient, maybe even cursed my name without knowing it. But they adjusted. People always do. Or at least most of them. 2 days later, my phone rang again. Same office. Different tone. 2 days later, my phone rang again. Same county office, same situation, but this time the voice on the other end didn't sound tight or defensive. It sounded careful, almost respectful. "Mr. Wright," he said, "we'd like to discuss a possible arrangement." I didn't answer right away, just leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch a little. Not to play games, just to make sure we were both clear this wasn't the same conversation anymore. I'm listening, I said finally. He cleared his throat. We're asking if you would consider allowing temporary access across your property while the roadwork is completed, under agreed terms. There it was. Not informal, not assumed, not taken, requested. I glanced out the window, at the field that had finally gone still again. The trenches were still there, cutting clean lines across what used to be a free-for-all, and for the first time since this started, I felt like I actually had a choice. I'll consider it, I said, but it won't be casual. We understand, he replied quickly. We can arrange a meeting. We set it for the next morning. Now, I could have said no. Would have been justified. Kept everything exactly as it was, and let the county deal with its own problem. And part of me wanted to. Not out of spite, just out of principle. Because there's something about being ignored that sticks with you longer than it should. But another part of me, the part that moved out here for peace, not for standoffs, knew there was a better way to handle it. So I showed up. They brought two people. Mark Ellison, the same guy I'd spoken to on the phone, and a woman named Rachel Kim, who handled infrastructure planning. Sharp, focused, the kind of person who didn't waste words. We stood right there on the edge of my property, morning sun just coming up over the trees, and for a second, nobody spoke. Then Rachel stepped forward. We should have contacted you sooner, she said. No hesitation, no excuses. Just clean accountability. That caught me off guard more than anything. I nodded once. Yeah, you probably should have. She didn't argue. Mark shifted slightly beside her, then said, We're trying to ease the pressure on Route 6 until repairs are done. Based on current timelines, about 3 weeks. 3 weeks turns into 5, I said. He gave a small, uneasy smile. Sometimes. Most times, I replied. Rachel stepped in again. That's why we want to formalize this. Clearly defined terms, limited duration, full restoration afterward. I looked out across the field, picturing it, not as it was now, but as it had been before all of this. Quiet. Undisturbed. Mine. Then I looked back at them. All right, I said. Here are my terms. You could feel the shift right there. Not confrontation, negotiation. First, there's one path. 1. You don't get the whole field, you get a defined strip. You lay gravel at your cost, so it doesn't tear up the soil any further. Rachel nodded immediately. That's reasonable. Second, no commercial trucks. I don't care how delayed they are. I'm not having heavy rigs chewing through my land. Mark opened his mouth like he was about to push back, then thought better of it. Passenger vehicles only, he said. Third, I continued. Once the roadwork is done, everything gets restored. Grass, grading, all of it. I want it back the way it was. Rachel didn't even hesitate. Agreed. I paused for a second, letting the last part sit there before I said it. And one more thing. They both looked at me. Any driver who leaves the marked path, even once the agreement's over. Immediately. I don't care if it's day 1 or day 20. Mark frowned slightly. That might be difficult to enforce. I held his gaze. Not my problem. Silence again. Rachel glanced at him, then back at me. We can include that clause. And just like that, it was done. No raised voices. No threats. Just clarity. They drew up the paperwork that afternoon. Clean, simple, signed by both sides. By the next day, crews were out there laying gravel along a narrow stretch that followed the original tire path, but tighter, controlled. Markers went up, clear boundaries, no confusion. And for a while, it actually worked. Traffic flowed. Not perfectly, but better. People followed the path, mostly. The chaos that had spread across my land before was gone, replaced by something structured, something agreed upon. I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel strange, though. Standing there on my porch, watching a line of cars pass through what used to be untouched grass, knowing I'd allowed it. Not because I had to, because I chose to. Hank stopped by again a few days into it. Same old truck, same half smile. Well, he said, looking out at the gravel strip, guess you went from Charity Road to toll-free highway. I chuckled. Temporary. Everything's temporary, he replied. Some things just forget to end. That stuck with me, because he wasn't wrong. And for a couple of days, I kept an eye on things. Not obsessively, just enough. Most drivers stayed where they were supposed to. A few got close to the edges, testing it, like people do. But the markers held, and so did the agreement. Until one afternoon, someone didn't. It was a black SUV. Bigger than the rest, louder too. Came in faster than it should have, tires kicking up more dust than necessary. I was already watching from the porch when it happened. Instead of following the gravel path, it drifted wide. Just a little at first, then more. Maybe the driver thought they could shave off a few seconds. Maybe they just didn't care. Either way, they left the line. Cut right across the grass that had just started to recover. I felt it immediately. That same shift in my chest from before, but sharper this time. Not surprise. Not confusion. Recognition. I grabbed my phone, stepped off the porch, and took a picture as the SUV exited back onto the road like nothing had happened. Didn't chase them. Didn't shout. Didn't need to. I went back inside, pulled up the agreement, and read that last clause again. Any driver who leaves the marked path ends the agreement immediately. No exceptions. I made one call. Rachel picked up. Hey, I said, calm as ever, we're done. There was a pause. What happened? One driver, black SUV, left the path. Another pause, longer this time. We can address that, she said carefully. Reinforce the boundaries. That wasn't the deal, I interrupted. Not angry, just firm. Silence. You're serious, she said. I was when I signed it. A slow exhale on her end. All right. And that was it. Next morning, crews came back, not to maintain the path, but to remove it. Gravel cleared, markers gone. By the afternoon, the trenches were back in place, just like before. Traffic returned to the road. Delays came back. People adjusted. Again. A few days later, I stood out there near the front of the property, looking over the field as the grass slowly started to reclaim itself. You could still see the marks if you knew where to look. Faint lines, like memories that hadn't fully faded yet. But they would, eventually. And as I stood there, I found myself thinking about that whole situation, not just what happened, but why it happened the way it did. Because the truth is, nobody set out to be the villain. Not the drivers, not the county, not even me. Everyone just made the choice that felt easiest in the moment, and let someone else deal with the cost. Until someone didn't. So now I'm curious. If you were in my position, would you have shut it down from the start? Or worked with them like I did? And if you were one of those drivers, would you have taken the shortcut? Let me know in the comments.